Hi, it's Peter Schweizer, and welcome to the Drill Down. Well, if you live in a city like, say, Washington, D.C. or Baltimore, Maryland, and you're concerned about violent crime, you should probably consider moving to Bogota, Colombia, or Islamabad, Pakistan, because they actually have lower murder rates. And the problem is the people that are governing your city don't seem that interested in actually trying to reduce violent crime where you live. So what's going on with the National Guard? Should they be deployed? Are there constitutional issues? We're going to unpack that today on the Drill Down. The co-host and the co-pilot of the show, of course, is 𝐃𝐫𝐤𝐥𝐥. Eric, how are you? Are you ready to move to Islamabad?
I love that you were saying that you just wanted to say Islamabad.
I did.
But
I love that word.
It is a true fact that Washington, D.C. has a higher crime rate, a higher violent crime rate than Bogota, Mexico City, Islamabad, even Lima, Peru. So it's almost like we're taking a tour of the world through the lens of Donald Trump and his desire to clean up America one violent city at a time.
You could almost say Washington, D.C. is a third world city, at least when it comes to violent crime.
Well, being kind of woke, I don't use the third world reference anymore. That's not language we considered acceptable. In fact, just like the DNC summer meeting, I feel like we should begin this program with a land acknowledgement.
They did, in fact, have a land acknowledgement that it was
pretty great.
Stolen land.
But that's exactly the issue, right? Like
Yep.
You have some people take violent crime very seriously. Like that Trump administration is doing that. And in fact, at the DNC summer meeting, where they did begin with a land acknowledgement, they said sort of the opposite, because obviously this idea that Trump's trying to deploy troops to Washington, D.C., and he's threatening to do so in Chicago and Baltimore and elsewhere, they're aware of that. And listen to what someone who works for the Vera Institute, which is a nonprofit that takes federal money, that they try to push the soft and kind of feel-good solutions to solving crime. Listen to what she said at the DNC summer meeting, and I think it's important because it informs how at least a portion of a major political party thinks about this issue.
Issues voters care about. Where does Trump go? Migrant crime, carjackings, the really lurid, awful stuff that is a crazy, crazy visual. Don't take the bait, because most Americans are more worried about how are we going to address mental health issues, the visible homelessness that we see on streets, and how do we deal with mental health and other issues that drive the sort of random incidents that scare all of us. That's what you should be talking about. That's where you should be focused. Don't take the bait in talking about migrant crime or carjackings or the things that actually don't matter to that many Americans.
What happened to you this weekend? I got carjacked, but it wasn't a big deal. I mean, it's crazy. It's really crazy. So that's really the heart of the issue when it comes to the deployment of the National Guard. Of course, Donald Trump did that in Washington, D.C. He has the constitutional authority to do it. Washington, D.C. is not a state. It is controlled by the federal government. There are certainly constitutional issues, and I think Trump has acknowledged that. He can't just do the same thing in other American states and in other American cities. So there are those constitutional questions, and I am a constitutionalist and think we should abide by them. But there's a deeper issue here, which is why has crime been tolerated to the extent that it has in these cities? Why are these leaders not willing to take steps to address it and deal with it? And what are the larger implications? And that's what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, the toleration is a really important point, because it's interesting. So Donald Trump is today bragging about the fact that we've seen a significant decrease in crime since the federal troops were deployed in Washington, D.C. They're saying there's been no murder for nearly 2 weeks for the first time in a long time. Robberies down 42%. Carjackings, those minor little skirmishes, down 85%. Property crimes down 10%, violent crimes down 25%. So they're saying it's a big win for what has happened in Washington, D.C., but it is actually not the first time they have said that crime was down in Washington, D.C. In January of this year, Peter Schweizer, January 5th, I believe. So Joe Biden, still president, his Department of Justice put out a press release saying violent crime in 2024 for D.C. down 35% to its lowest total in 30 years. So you're thinking, hey, man, stuff must be great in D.C. So what's the issue? Why would Donald Trump even need to do this? What is there to tolerate? But then you find out last month that a D.C. police commander was under investigation for making changes to crime statistics. and the police union accused the department of deliberately falsifying crime data. And the quote from a member of the police union saying, "Our members respond to the scene of a felony offense and they get pressure from a lieutenant or captain to write it up in a different way so that it falls into a different classification." So to your point, like DC has police officers under investigation for falsifying crime data, which doesn't mean the crime is down. It just means that they're just encouraging people to tolerate it more and they don't want it to be known how bad it is.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fantastic point. I mean, it almost sounds like the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which gives us these wacky job numbers, is also cooking the books here. But the larger issue as well is not just that there's the cooking of the books. It's that Americans generally have become less likely to report crimes, even violent crimes, because they feel like they're either not going to get justice, it's going to take too long, there's going to be other implications that come up. The Justice Department does this national crime victim survey where they survey tens of thousands of people all around the country. And what they found is that 45%, think about that, 45% of violent crimes in America never get reported to the police.
Well, you know why?
Why?
Because people don't care about them, like the lady said. You know, it's just, hey, come on. We were worried about the homeless. I'm not worried about the violent crime.
Yeah.
You know?
No, I mean, it's, people don't think that the police are going to be able to respond. They won't respond, whatever reasons. With property crimes, it's 69%.
69% of property crimes don't get reported?
Don't get reported. People break into your house, people break into your car. 69% of them, you pickpocket, 69% of them don't get reported. So the point is that these numbers, may be going up, they may be going down, the books may be being cooked, but the reality is that there's a lot more crime in these urban areas and elsewhere that just don't ever get reported.
So two things. Number one, we're going to talk about a reason why people might feel that way is because I'm not saying we have a crime issue across the country. I don't know that the stats actually support that, but we do have a police recruitment and retention issue. And that's one of the things that we learned in doing research for this podcast. Cities all across the country, the same cities where Donald Trump is threatening to send more troops, whether he has the right to do so or not, like Baltimore and Chicago, all have significant police shortages. New York has a police shortage so bad, and it's only going to get worse because you got 3,700 more police officers about to be able to qualify for full pension, so that they've actually lowered the education requirement from 60 hours of education to 24, but they are making you run faster. So, but we have a real police shortage. So number one, that's probably one reason why people are hesitant to call. But number two, go back to, and this all stems from these conditions that have led to more crime, more tolerance from crime, less police officers. It's the summer of 2020, right? Because we sort of shifted the posture to be anti-police. And remember, there was that one person who called in because Minneapolis was talking about getting rid of police officers. And they said, well, what do you do if someone has broken into your home? Like on a call, to talk about this. And one of the police commissioners said, or a city commissioner said, well, just realize that if you're calling to report a crime, that's coming from a position of privilege.
It's so laughable, and yet it is the reality in so many of these cities. And when you look at the opposition to deploying the National Guard, and again, I fully agree that a governor and a mayor, but primarily a governor, has to agree to allow the National Guard in. But the interesting thing to me is that these guys have in the past brought in the National Guard in certain circumstances.
Ooh, do tell.
So J.B. Pritzker, the governor of Illinois, when the Democrats held their convention in Chicago in 2024, what do? They deployed 800 members of the Illinois National Guard to help out and assist with basic security during the convention. So it's not that they're opposed to the National Guard being deployed to keep visitors and tourists safe. They're prepared to do that. It just seems that they're willing to tolerate, high levels of shootings in particularly the south side of Chicago, and they're not interested in deploying the National Guard. I would add also Gavin Newsom, as the governor of California when he had President Xi of China visit San Francisco for the APEC summit. They also deployed additional law enforcement, including the military, to provide security. Remember, they cleaned up San Francisco. They pushed the homeless aside. The point is, he was prepared to do it for foreign leaders. They just don't seem to be prepared to do it for the actual constituents and the people that live in their cities.
1,000 additional law enforcement officials come in to clean up the city for Xi's visit. And in Chicago, ahead of the DNC, they had like all the different municipal workers. They're like sweeping the streets, they're trimming trees, they're doing all this stuff. No, you're absolutely right. So they're definitely willing to put in the effort to do so for certain events. But how come they are not allowed? They're not willing to try to put in more police to clean up their very real crime issues. And it's because they don't want to admit that they have a crime issue. And if they do, then they want to act like it's like kind of Trump fabricating this thing. But listen to this. So in the Hills article about this push, which I would just say this. It would not shock me because you've heard Harmeet Dillon, who's been on this podcast, who's with the Department of Justice, say that they are fully willing to leverage the money that these cities and states take as, like, said, listen, if you're going to take our money, then you will also do the things we want you to do. That's how they're getting states to comply with trans issues. And it wouldn't shock me if they say, listen, you will take these troops because your streets are so bad. But the Hill goes, hey, they're going to send troops to Baltimore, Chicago, is threatening to, that are overwhelmingly blue and represented by Democratic mayors. That's the Hill's commentary on this. Mm-hmm. The top 15 cities, Peter Schweizer, of crime, the most crime-ridden cities per capita in the country. What do you think they all have in common?
They're all run by Democrats.
They are, in fact, all run by Democrats. And the number one city, the most violent city per capita is what?
Memphis, Tennessee.
You nailed that. I was shocked. Like, we should play crime trivia with Peter Schweizer. He's great at this. Memphis is 1, Portland's 2, Baltimore is 10th, and Chicago is 14th. So, I mean, and by the way, Washington, D.C. is 13th. So, I mean, these are cities with real issues.
Yeah, and Islamabad is in there somewhere too, right?
Stop it.
Yeah, no, I mean, so the question becomes, why do these cities tolerate this crime? And the mayors pretend that it's not an issue or it's an abnormal condition in their city. Chicago has had, violent shootings in the South Side for decades, and it never goes away. They never seem to do anything about it. And I think part of it, frankly, is because of who the victims are. The people that are the victims tend to be poor and they tend to be black. And that means that just statistically, they tend to be low propensity voters. And so the reality is that in a city, like Washington, D.C., most of the voters are wealthy people who live in wealthier neighborhoods or, who live in apartment buildings with security. The people that are the vast majority of victims tend to live in poorer neighborhoods. They don't vote. And these local politicians just don't seem to care. And yet they develop this sort of righteousness when Trump says, hey, let's send in the National Guard and clean things up, as if they're, offended to the notion of cleaning these things up.
Yeah, it's a weird dynamic because obviously, like, Peter Schweizer and I, we're not just like white, we're conservative podcast white, right? Like, so, but here we are, we're talking about these issues that do impact black communities. And so, yeah, you're right. In Chicago, black residents are 22 times more likely to be killed because of the crime in Chicago than white victims. They're 80% of the homicide victims, and 30% of all crime victims were black women, despite only being 16% of the population. In 2020 in New York, black people are 24% of the city's population, 65% of the victims in murders, and 74% of the shootings in New York are black as well. So, I mean, you're absolutely right. And I think it's a great point. One reason why these things are tolerated is because they don't seem to impact people who matter as much as the ballot box, which is really ironic because when you consider that part of the reason why we have the issue with police and crime in the cities that we do is because of the Black Lives Matter movement in the summer of 2020. It created these very adverse conditions. It's one of the reasons why you're seeing law enforcement shortages all over the country. Chicago has among the worst. So does San Francisco, by the way. So does Baltimore. So does New York. So, but in the name of Black Lives Matter, they've created conditions that unfortunately disproportionately impact and end black lives.
And think about this for a second. Just think about what you were just saying. The entire BLM movement really erupted in 2020 because an individual who was in police custody died. Mm-hmm. a black man died. And that was supposed to be a symbol of widespread systematic racism. So a single man died. It's a tragedy when anybody dies. And yet you have hundreds, if not thousands, of other people that are black in these cities that get killed all the time on a regular basis. And yet there seems to be no political opposition. And there's this weird dynamic, I think, with a lot of these mayors that are, Democrats tend to be on the political left. Their desire to sort of dumb down the rules. You saw carjackings. I mean, that's not really a big deal. We've seen, other mayors talk about how we don't want to have, we want to have cashless bail because, he kind of roughed a guy up, but he shouldn't have to go to jail for that. So they want to loosen those rules and laws. But on the other hand, they want to enforce these sort of language requirements, right? That you have to describe somebody by their proper pronoun, and if you don't, you should face some kind of, legal sanction. So there's this absurd paradox in how they don't want to enforce certain rules and they want to use others. And of course, the people that suffer are the people that generally don't vote.
No, it's a great point. And I do think it speaks to, we don't typically kind of weigh in on the political ramifications of things and do political analysis. But I do think that in addition, number one, Donald Trump lives in Washington, D.C., probably takes it personally that like, hey, we want the city of Washington, D.C. You got a lot of people that work for me to be safe and feel safe. But it's also, I think, from a political standpoint, it is another one of those 80-20 issues because 80% of the country is like, yeah, we should enforce the law. We should uphold the law. And you're forcing people who don't support this to suggest that, no, there's no problem here. It's just as you're forcing J.B. Pritzker to say, don't come to Chicago, we're fine. When in fact, like what we now know from statistics, the rate at which shooting victims die from being shot in Chicago is up 50% since 2010. The number of high-capacity magazines recovered at shootings by the Chicago Police Department increased by 480%. Shell casings recovered per victim is more than doubled. So while these cities are saying, oh, well, we're seeing this dip in crime, you kind of wonder, is what's happening in Baltimore, is what's happening in Chicago no different than what's happening in Washington, D.C., where, like, they're incentivized to not suggest that crime rates are as high because it makes the leadership look bad.
Yeah, no, exactly right. They want to dismiss the evidence. They want to minimize the evidence because it makes them look bad. There's also this weird paradox. This is something you mentioned when you were researching this yesterday, this weird paradox where you have certain institutions and entities that are incentivized to downplay crime statistics and emphasize, other means for combating crime because there's cash payments involved, right? You were describing how during the Biden administration, there were grants that were given to cities to deal with violent crime, but it was not money that was to hire more police. It was some of these weird sort of...
Well, yeah, luckily all that stuff got doged, but it was like hundreds of millions of dollars in grants from something called the Office of Justice Assistance. And it went to these major cities. And if you look at what they are spending the money on, It's not, that's the thing, is like the left's solution to crime prevention is not more police. It's the opposite. And there's actually a really interesting reason behind it. And that's why I think this issue, unfortunately, is not going to get better without some dramatic steps. So they were talking about this last night on CNN. And Tiffany Cross, who's a former MSNBC political commentator, was talking about what the troops mean, not in terms of like preventing crime when the stats are quite clear, but listen to what someone who's got a perspective on this said about what troops mean and what it suggests.
I think the reason why you may feel that way, Arthur, is because you maneuver in society with a certain privilege. The question is, who are these?
Well, hold on, what privilege? When I get on the subway, just tell me the privilege. When I'm dressed like this on the subway, I am a target. That is not a privilege. I'm a target. There's the guy who probably has a wallet and a watch.
Arthur, I want you to be
That's not
open.
Privilege.
I want you to have a little bit of intellectual curiosity and be open and let me finish my point.
I'm very curious.
Thank you. I think when you ask the question, who is the militarized law enforcement there to protect, and who are they there to protect from? And so often in this country, particularly, that is how law enforcement swole their ranks. There was so much violence against people of color, black people in particular in this country, that they said it's okay to beat a black person, to murder a black person, but you gotta be wearing a badge when you do it.
Who are the victims?
Do you want to listen, or do you can't talk and listen at the same time?
Well,
let me just tell you. It doesn't sound like it. My point to you is, I am telling you on the front lines what is happening. And there are militarized police force going and harassing longtime law-abiding citizens.
We live in a country, by the way, now where everybody has a freaking camera, right, with their phone. Mm-hmm. The cops are wearing cameras on their uniforms. There are cameras around with military personnel deployed. And every time there is an incident, George Floyd, for example, there have been others. Every time there's an incident where there's a physical combat between a police officer and somebody, we don't always know the context, it goes everywhere on social media. The suggestion that somehow there are these silent beatings going on that nobody's aware of, nobody's filming, is just ridiculous.
And the statistics, in fact, to the point, bear out the opposite. Like, that was the big takeaway, actually, from the summer of 2020. There were some high-profile police interactions that ended with people dying, and so it became like this heightened concern, and you have a lot of conversations about it. But the statistics actually show that law enforcement involved shootings or law enforcement related deaths with people that they're trying to arrest are down.
Yeah.
But what's, again, like, that perspective, I think, is the reason why you're seeing these police staffing shortages else, because the people who run these major cities are from the same political party who hold conventions where the people say, hey, carjacking's not that big a deal. Federal police, reminiscent of, racially motivated beatings. Meanwhile, you've got 500 vacancies in Baltimore that they can't hire. You've got 2,000 cops short in Chicago, and you got the mayor, Brandon Johnson, going on Joe Scarborough saying, kind of refusing to say we'd like more police, because that's just math they don't want to accept.
So the question is there a cop shortage in Islamabad?
I doubt it.
But in all seriousness, so where do you think this is going, right? We know violence crime is an issue. You can skew the numbers. You can say it's getting better. You can do all this stuff. There are people that are dying. There are people that are getting shot. There are rapes that are taking place in these cities. There are massive problems with police shortages. In D.C., I think it was 4 million hours of overtime were done because...
Which, by the way, you talk about economic incentives. Baltimore is the same thing. They have a $600 million budget. They have fewer cops, but because they have fewer cops, those cops that are working are getting paid.
Yeah.
And so it came up at the meeting, like, how come you guys are spending so much on overtime? So are those people incentivized?
Yeah. So the question is where do you think this is going? I mean, I think just for political reasons, Pritzker and Newsom, they do not want to have Trump claim a victory on their own turf by reducing crime, so they are not going to invite the National Guard. And where do you think this story goes, and what do you think we need to be doing in the future in order to reduce violent crime?
I think just keep looking at the numbers. I mean, the reality is what solves violent crime? More police.
Yeah.
I mean, you're the one that was talking about, there's people that you listen to, that there's a clear correlation between the increase in guns, the increase in law enforcement presence, and a reduction in violent crime.
Yeah.
I would not be shocked if you see them find a way to leverage the federal government as a way to get them to do something about it.
Yeah, no, look, here's the challenge for the left in these that are running these cities. They're in a paradox that they cannot get out of, a contradiction. On the one hand, the reason that they push for gun control is they say, we don't want guns out there. You should not be defending yourself. If you are the victim of a crime, call the police. On the other hand, they denounce the police as racist, as bigoted. They limit their numbers, so they're understaffed, and so the police don't show up. So it's got to reach a point in America where the people that are subject to this victimization are either going to leave the cities they live in, and which they are, and those that can't afford have got to get politically organized and say, look, this is ridiculous. We're not putting up with this anymore. How successful they're going to be, I don't know. But that is the sort of death spiral of these cities. You saw in San Francisco, they elected a guy who seems to be more of a moderate technocrat. He's committed to the police. He's getting it worked out. But it is very, very hard to manage these cities when you have this kind of ideology and belief system that is so skewing people from what the reality actually is.
I would love to see the cities figured out. I like cities. Like
yes.
we both like to go to fun cities
yes.
and do fun things, and some of these cities are cool. But the reality is that you do have, I think, some policy problems that they need to address, and you have to sort of like reject some of the things that become popular values to hold by that political party over the last 5 years to do so.
Yeah, so you like cities, maybe you will visit Islamabad.
I'm in. I bet the food's decent.
I don't know Pakistani food at all.
Well, your palate is a different podcast.
It is. Well, we appreciate you as always taking the time to listen to this podcast. You can find out more about the work we do at thedrilldown.com. And please subscribe to this podcast wherever fine podcasts are located. Thanks again. Until next time.